Hello, BookTube. It's day 6 of NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, in which tens of thousands of people all over the world come together to write a novel, the draft of a novel, 50,000 words of a novel in the month of November. Despite holidays and family gatherings and obligations of every kind, 1,667 words a day, more or less, depending on your obligations that day, in order to get 50,000 words done. And the writer who's hovering over my pep talk today, I'll try to keep it brief, is the great Victorian novelist Anthony Trollope. He was on my mind when I was talking the other day, that finger wagging diatribe about people who say they don't have any time, because Anthony Trollope was a very busy official in his job at the post office. He was also married and had a family. He loved to fox hunt. He had a very peppy social schedule, and those of you who know anything about him will know he wrote an enormous shelf full of books, and a lot of them are very big. And the thing that kind of gets forgotten, I think, by the mass populace is that a lot of them are really good. They're not garbage. Even the ones that seem dashed off have worth, and an enormous number of them, 10 or 15, are great. That's a fine track record for any novelist, and Trollope did it with no time on the clock at all, none. If he can do it with a pen and ink, then you can do it with no support. He had no support whatsoever. Every once in a blue moon, every once a year or so, he would go to a literary dinner where other people would be there, and he could talk sales, and he was kind of awkward in public. But in terms of personal psychological support, while he was engaged in writing, even his family didn't offer it. They were just grateful for the checks. And the reason he's on my mind today for this pep talk, I want to do another quick talk about plot before we move on to other things. Trollope, of course, was a plotter in his day. If you were going to be a published writer, you weren't a pantser. The NaNoWriMo term for people who write by the seat of their pants, so they don't know what they're going to write from day to day. There was no such thing in professional writing circles in Trollope's day any more than there's any such thing in professional writing circles today. Pantsing is an activity that is really practice. I mean, that's really what it is, and God bless it for that. It's really good at that. It's practice in creating the words, letting them flow out of you. It's practice in jumping from one creative inspiration to another. What if can happen even in the most planned novel. But in my opinion, it's a different order of magnitude completely. It's a different beast in the category than planning, than plotting. And Trollope was a massive plotter. He knew in fairly good amount of detail what was going to happen in his books from the beginning. And he understood something that it comes with the territory of plotting, and I wanted to mention it today, and that is exposition. If you know what you want to write, the story that you want to write, then you know the dramatic nodules that you're going to hit. No story, no matter how carefully plotted, can be all dramatic nodules. The closest thing that fiction comes, I think, is The Hunchback of Notre Dame by Victor Hugo, and even there's always going to be an element of moving furniture around, of getting characters from A to B, of scene setting, of background information, giving your readers the background information that you know because you invented the world, but they don't know. Trollope used to get very good at it. By the time he was in the middle of his career and he was getting a large amount of money for every book, he made an art out of the self-consciousness of it. He would actually apologize in his books to the reader. He'd break the fourth wall and say, writers just have to give you, he didn't call them this, but info dumps. Writers just have to bring you up to speed on the story that they're telling you. I'm afraid I have to do this. Otherwise, if I were artsy, I would start in the middle of things, but then I'd be wasting your time later on with backtracking. And that might get more confusing. Instead, what I'm going to do is try your patience and just give you all the information about these 3 families that I'm going to write about up front. And then he would do that for sometimes a chapter, sometimes 2 or even 3 chapters. Constantly telling the reader, I'm sorry I'm trying your patience. We're about ready to get to the hero and heroine, if you'll just bear with me. Now, a lot of that, when Trollope was at the height of his fame, was artifice. He knew perfectly well how good a job he did at doing that. he knew perfectly well that his readers weren't being put upon. They enjoyed it. And if you read those, what we now call info dumps, they're very enjoyable. He was just a really good storyteller, and he knew it. So his apologies weren't meant, quite on face value. He wasn't actually, you then as now, a publisher who's paying you for a book is not going to want you to do anything that actually deserves an open apology. They want to be in on the game. They want to make sure you're in on the game, and he was. But if you plot the way he does, you're not. It's not fashionable anymore for a writer to stop his narrative and address the reader directly and say, "I'm sorry, I'm giving you all this info, but you kind of need it." That's really not done anymore. I sometimes wish that it were. I wonder that if it isn't a little bit of a creative retreat for writers not to do that. But one way or another, writers don't do that anymore with the apologies, but they still have the same problem that Trollope used to fake apologize for, which is that there's a lot more going on in your story than just the action. There's the background, and that requires exposition. And the pep talk that I wanted to give today was to point out to you that writing exposition can also be fun. In fact, it has to be, or reading it won't be fun. And your whole goal, the whole purpose of this, of writing of any kind, this is, of course, my opinion as an Old Bailey hack, the whole purpose of writing of any kind is to entertain an audience. Not to work out your inner demons, not to sound a gong for any kind of social issue. Your whole purpose is to entertain your readers. I, as those of you who will know, who might have been paying attention on this channel over the last few months, I have very little patience with fiction writers who don't think that way, who think they have higher callings, who like to stroke their throat and look off into the distance, and they will allow you to join them on this intellectual journey. I have very little patience for such people. I could name a whole bunch of them that I don't like who do it all the time, including a whole bunch of them that I know who do it all the time. I dislike that because it gets to the heart of the condescension of novel writing that isn't, believe it or not, often present in the writing of any other kind of genre except modern poetry. Modern poetry is beyond the pale. So best not to target. Most of it is. Most of it. If you have a modern poet who's writing all in lowercase letters, no capital letters, who's not breaking any lines, who's not using any punctuation, and who's talking about that left turn on the way to the second room on the second floor, I remember it well. Yellow toy soldiers, yellow wallpaper, howdy doody at 4. And you're reading it, and it's obvious that you're reading, disjointed jottings from someone's personal journal, details of their background, of their personal past that can't mean anything to anyone other than themselves. In other words, completely hermetically sealed away from you. And I read a lot of fiction, contemporary fiction, that's the same way too, where the novelist or short story writer, or it's even worse, involved, thinks that you're here for them. Which couldn't be more wrong. It is an exact reversal of the truth, which is that they're here for you. I read a lot of that and I don't like it, and part of the reason why it flourishes is because writers have stopped paying attention to the art of exposition. So I wanted to give you a pep talk today that if you're hitting a point like that in your story, as I'm sure you are, by day 6, I'm sure you have the topspin has come off the jolt at the beginning of the story, because I don't agree. I might like Trollope, but I don't agree with starting a book by apologizing and then giving a lot of exposition. There are all sorts of ways to do it that don't require that. Even if you're going to give a block of exposition, wait a chapter or two before you do that. Hook the reader first. Show them that they've got entertaining stuff to come instead of trying their patience. But even if you haven't done that, by day 6, you will certainly have reached a point in the book that you're writing where you're going to need to do exposition. And I wanted to encourage you not to get discouraged by that. Those blocks of writing exposition can feel like an old friend of mine in a workshop once referred to it as heavy lifting. Said that, it's the least glamorous part of writing any long work of fiction, but it's absolutely necessary. Sooner or later, you have to have a block of heavy lifting. I think that it can be an interesting challenge. I think because Trollope apologized for his heavy lifting, but he was also really good at it. He got better at it. You can see him in novel after novel getting better at it, and that's good to remember. Every single aspect of what you're writing during NaNoWriMo should be good. There shouldn't be anything that's phoned in. There shouldn't be anything that looks like heavy lifting, even if it is. So when you're doing it, up your game a little on the inside. Work a little harder to realize, as I'm sure you do, that an action chapter or a dialogue chapter or section is much more inherently interesting for a reader than exposition. Realize that's just the nature of the beast. They are inherently different interest levels. So when you get to a point of exposition, up your game a little. Try a little harder. Concentrate a little more on making that exposition every bit as interesting and readable as the other parts. And I firmly believe that when you do that, when you concentrate a little more, try a little harder on the exposition, because I encountered this myself. Most of the stories that I've written for NaNoWriMo have been historical. This is the first one I've written in contemporary world, and in historical fiction, the heavy lifting is everywhere. And so I've learned a little about how to make it more entertaining, and it's a fun process. So I wanted to stress that if you've reached that point now, we're saying, well, okay, I introduced everybody, I got conversations started, I got the conflict introduced, but now I need the background, and just look on it as a fun challenge, not just to get it done, but to get it and to keep it at the same level of interest as the earlier parts. And that's all I had to say for today. I'll be back tomorrow with more. Thank you, BookTube.